On October 3, 2025, NASA's rover Check took pictures of an object called Tri-Eye Atlas. This is not the clearest frame, but still something. An astrographer named Simon Schmoose compiled 20 images, and here it is. A faint spot of light exactly where the interstellar visitor should be. People discuss it, analyze, and argue about what it might mean. But here's what's strange. On the same day, NASA laid off 15,000 employees. The high-resolution camera of the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, capable of capturing images 30 times better than those taken by the Check, was perfectly calibrated for a shot that could become historic. The European Space Agency was also monitoring this. The Mars Express and ExoMars probes were on standby. Where are these images? And that's not all. Remote observers discovered technology aboard this object back in August. A device the size of a flash drive, deliberately placed inside an ancient comet, transmitted pulses. They described this a few months before the telescopes began to record chemical anomalies. This video consists of 2 parts. The first half is dedicated to 3 Atlas and all the latest news. The second half covers general news from the world of space for this week. Time codes in the description if you want to move to the next section. Before diving deeper, if you're interested, like and subscribe to stay updated. Write in the comments where you are listening from, what time it is, and what you think about this object. Is it a natural phenomenon or something more?
Хотите помочь нашему сообществу расти? Поделитесь этим в X, Facebook, Reddit или вашем мессенджере. Спасибо, что всегда поддерживаете нас. Глава 1. Цилиндр в марсианском небе. Позвольте показать вам нечто, что появилось в Твиттере 80 часов назад и изменило все.
A user named Euphemania posted an image with a caption that shocked the online astronomy community. The new and closest to us, Tri-Eye Atlas, as it passes by, is not a comet. It is perfectly cylindrical. The post featured an elongated object captured while flying past Mars, and for several hours, thousands of people shared it. Before dismissing it as yet another internet conspiracy, understand what makes it special. This is not a blurry photo from someone's home telescope. The coordinates matched, the time matched, and most importantly, the silence of official sources matched too. Because this is what no one discusses. On October 3rd, when the Tri-Eye Atlas was at its closest distance to Mars, 29 million kilometers, we were supposed to receive numerous images. The high-resolution camera aboard NASA's Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter was perfectly calibrated. The tools of the Mars Express and ExoMars Trace Gas Orbiter were directed straight at this place. Numerous spacecraft, many angles, the best resolution ever achieved for an interstellar object, and we got nothing. Well, not quite nothing. We received silence. But into this silence burst voices that could not be ignored. An account called Atlas Anomaly 3 began publishing a technical analysis that turned out to be significantly more detailed than typical conspiracy content. 10 specific points, each referencing real observations. A carbon dioxide-rich coma discovered using the James Webb Space Telescope. Water and hydroxyl emissions recorded by SWIFT. Polarimetric anomalies showing negative polarization at 2.7% at a phase angle of 7 degrees. A combination unmatched among asteroids and comets. Think about this for a moment. These were not vague speculations. All links pointed to real tools, precise measurements, and scientific articles. Then a cosmologist appeared, a Twitter user named Manny Penny, who introduced herself as an expert in plasma phenomena and a former BBC journalist, published something that even made skeptics think. She claimed that the leading cosmologist named Stephen Burns believes this object possesses intelligence, surrounded by dust plasma, and demonstrates a consciousness that is already communicating with us and other planets. A consciousness that communicates. You might think this sounds like a realm bordering on madness, and perhaps it does. But here's where it gets interesting. It wasn't published in some dark corner of the internet. It was in plain sight, detailing the credentials of Manny Penny and her experience in investigative journalism. She added one detail that sent shivers down the spine of everyone following the events. We can no longer observe it, as the object is too close to the sun, so we will only see it again in December. December. 3 months of waiting. 3 months during which the object will be hidden behind the sun, completely inaccessible to any telescope on Earth. And during these 3 months, if the trajectory changes, we won't know about it until the object reappears. Then there was Jon Stewart, not a comedian, but a UFO researcher and journalist who published a message that sounded like a warning from another era. My source has fallen silent, NASA is shutting down, even Congress is on break. If 3 atlases activate ancient texts, the sky will ignite with enlightening light and the world will forget its reflection. This was called a prophecy. Agencies call it a protocol. I call it inevitable. Ancient texts, Vatican files, harbinger. These hashtags gained popularity alongside technical astronomical discussions. What to do with this? How to separate signal from noise when noise can be a signal. Because here is the unpleasant truth. In the last 48 hours, while these posts went viral, no official images of the flyby past Mars were published. Neither from NASA, ESA, nor China's Tianwen-1 mission, nor from the UAE with their HOPE orbiter, all of them observing the object. The only visual evidence we have came from an astrophotographer named Simon Schmalz, who combined 20 images from the Perseverance rover's camera and discovered what he described as a faint spot of light in the constellation of coronavirus. Not far from the place where they awaited the comet, an indistinct trace appeared. This was all humanity could capture at a closer look at the interstellar visitor. From spacecraft capable of distinguishing objects smaller than a car on the surface of Mars, we received only a vague spot. Although, perhaps they saw something else and simply chose not to show it to us. The anomaly tracking of the 3-dimensional atlas continued to publish updates that became increasingly specific, an unexpected increase in brightness. The object brightens faster than predicted by models, which may indicate more volatile or efficient ejection mechanisms than expected given its distance. Spacecraft were supposed to observe during the solar conjunction. When the object hides behind the sun, ground observations cease. The European Space Agency redirects Martian orbiters to track it around October 3rd, when it will be about 30 million kilometers away from us. Each update was technically correct. Every detail could be verified based on published scientific observations, yet the conclusion they sought was obvious. It did not behave like a comet. Then came a detail that no one could explain: the shape. Many independent astronomy enthusiasts reported the same thing. When they processed their images, enhancing contrast and removing the stars in the background, the remaining image did not resemble the blurred, uneven spot one would expect from a comet with an active coma. It was elongated and smooth, almost geometric, perfectly cylindrical, as they said on UFO Mania. Skeptics would point out that the elongation could be an artifact of motion, image processing, or how light scatters in the coma, and they would be right. It could be so. But this can also be real. We know this because Oumuamua, the first interstellar visitor, also had an elongated shape. Some said it was pancake-shaped. Others claimed it resembled a cigar, but it was definitely not round. Definitely not what we expected. So, when the 13th Atlas shows similar characteristics, when several independent observers report the same geometric quality, and when official channels remain silent, what should we think? The answer, according to carefully formulated statements from NASA, is that the 13th Atlas poses no threat to Earth. Its trajectory keeps it at a safe distance of hundreds of millions of kilometers from our planet. He will approach the sun on October 30th and then continue his journey into interstellar space, never to return. This is all true. It all bypasses the question that actually concerns everyone. What is it? And why, on the day we were supposed to see him up close, were 15,000 NASA employees told to leave work? Chapter 2. The discovery of remote viewers. What I am about to tell you happened in August 2025, 2 months before the flyby of Mars, before the shutdown, before all those viral posts that caught public attention, and it happened under conditions that make it impossible to dismiss as a figment of imagination or bias. Her name is Birdie Yavorsky, and if you know anything about remote viewing, this name is familiar to you. She was the vice president of the Farsight Institute and has nearly 30 years of professional experience in remote viewing. She has a master's degree in digital forensics, and this is not quite the profile of someone seeking internet fame with extravagant claims. In August, her friend sent her a set of coordinates, just numbers, without context, photos, or news articles. This is exactly how legitimate remote zooming works. The target remains completely unknown. The zoomer has no idea what they are exploring until the session is over. Birdie sat down, entered her data, and began to describe what she perceives. The first thing she reported was movement in space, something that was moving, something old, very old. She described it as a natural object resembling a rock, exactly what you would expect if asked to see a comet, and for a while, that was all she saw. but then she noticed something unusual. Later, in a podcast discussing her findings, she said that there was something that wasn't quite natural. It was like discovering a fingerprint on something that should be pristine, on a sign where only randomness should exist. She delved into the session, and then she perceived something small, the size of a flash drive, something that was intentionally placed inside this object, not on the surface, but within. Someone drilled into this rock, she reported, drilled into this icy stone intentionally, and placed something there, encoded with all sorts of information. It resembles an archive, a message in a bottle. But it is not just a message. It is a kind of technology. Now, stop and think about what it describes. No aliens, no giant spaceships. It's a piece of technology the size of a flash drive, ancient beyond measure, hidden inside a comet that has been traveling through the galaxy for billions of years. She continued. This device is so old, and although the object itself has existed for billions of years, what is placed inside is also very, very old. Did a civilization from the other side of the galaxy send a small robot to drill into it and insert their message and technology, knowing it would continue its journey? This question sounds like science fiction until you remember that we have done something similar ourselves. The Voyager probe carried golden discs, time capsules designed to survive for billions of years in hopes that someone would eventually find them. The idea of using natural objects as vessels for messages is not foreign to us. We just hadn't thought of it in reverse. A friend who gave Birdie the coordinates waited for the end of the session to reveal what she had seen. The interstellar object Tri-Eye Atlas, which hadn't even made the news headlines for several weeks. She witnessed something that most people were still unaware of. But Birdie was not going to stop. She held 2 more sessions, delving into her perceptions, trying to understand what exactly she was seeing, and in those subsequent sessions, she discovered something that changed everything. She reported that it was also being transmitted. Messages were coming in with impulses. It is being broadcast in the present time. Not was broadcast billions of years ago, but is being broadcast now. When the podcast host mentioned that astronomer Avi Loeb recently published calculations showing that the object Triangulum Atalis came from the same region of the sky as the famous WOW signal from 1970, Birdie did not hesitate. That's very interesting, she said. It is quite possible that this is the WOW signal. Now, you might be wondering how seriously to take reports of distant visions. This is not a traditional scientific method. It is difficult to reproduce or verify. Skeptics completely reject him. Believers swear by him, and the truth, as always, probably lies somewhere in between. But what makes Birdie's story noteworthy is that she was not alone. Several groups engaged in remote viewing, working independently, targeted the three-eyed atlas in the months following its opening. While the details varied, certain themes emerged repeatedly: technology, intentional placement, broadcasting, and the involvement of non-human intelligence. One group reported perceiving humanoid forms associated with the object. Another described what they called graffiti, signs, and inscriptions. Someone signed it. Several observers noted the feeling that the object was camouflaged, deliberately avoiding detection, as if it did not want to be fully visible. One particularly detailed report mentioned special accesses, evacuation points, and a schedule. These were not vague mystical impressions, but specific technical details sounding more like an intelligence report than a session of clairvoyance. There were more alarming elements, mentions of circles and fields, advanced spherical devices, hybrid warfare, invisible warfare. The phrase, brain scanning technologies, appeared in several independent sessions, indicating that whatever it was, it had the ability to influence minds, causing mass hysteria or hallucinations. Now, does this confirm that 3A Atlas is not just a comet? Of course not. Distant vision, even in its strictest forms, remains in the realm of anomalous cognition rather than hard science. It is not measurements, not photographs, but subjective impressions filtered through human consciousness. But they also astonishingly agree among several independent observers who had no contact with each other, and they frighteningly intersect with physical anomalies that telescopes have begun to detect. Consider what Birdie described: a small technological device intentionally placed inside a comet billions of years ago. If this is true, what would we expect to see? We would expect the object to resemble a comet from a distance: ice, dust, gas emissions. All familiar signs, but up close we could notice something unusual: strange chemical compositions, unexpected materials, behavior that seems almost artificial rather than random. We assumed it would be massive, much more massive than its visible size might suggest, because there must be something dense at its core, something that does not sublimate, something that remains intact despite how much the ice evaporates. And perhaps we expected him to send signals, not loudly and not obviously, but if you knew where to look, if you had the right instruments pointed in the right direction at the right time, you might catch something. A pulsation, a pattern, a signal that should not exist. Bertie Yavorsky realized this in August, before most scientific data was published, before the anomalies became undeniable, before NASA fell silent. She described a message in a bottle traveling through the galaxy, and now, as 3 Atlas satellites hide behind the sun, when official channels refuse to publish images of Mars passing by, when amateur astronomers report cylindrical shapes, and scientists record impossible chemistry, this bottle approaches perihelion, the point of maximum heat, maximum stress, the moment when, as Avalov said, confessions surface. If a piece of technology the size of a flash drive is buried in the heart of this comet, October 29th will be the moment it either reveals itself or remains hidden forever. The fact that NASA sent 15,000 employees on forced leave just before we could get the best view of the object raises the question that remote observers have been asking since August. What did they see that they are not showing us? Chapter 3. The deafening silence of NASA. October 3rd, 2025 was supposed to be historic. The day humanity would get its closest look at an interstellar visitor. The Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter is perfectly positioned, its high-resolution camera ready to capture images 30 times better than the Hubble telescopes. The American Mars Express and ExoMars Trace Gas Orbiter stand by with a full set of instruments. But at the very moment when NASA needed it most, 83% of the agency disappeared. 15,000 civil servants were put on forced leave during what was supposed to be the most intense observation campaign in the history of interstellar astronomy. The official explanation was simple. The federal government shut down. The budget conflict had nothing to do with the 3A's Atlas. It was just an unfortunate coincidence. These 2 words explained why the leading space agency in the world fell silent at the moment when an object with 7 statistical impossibilities passed just 29 million kilometers from our Martian spacecraft. Think about that for a moment. 3 Atlas eyes were opened in July. The flyby of Mars had been planned for several months. The scientists understood that this would be their only chance to capture high-quality images before the object disappeared behind the sun. NASA, ESA, and every space agency on Earth knew about this. In the last week before the closest approach, the United States government announced a shutdown. NASA's official website stopped updating, and press releases ceased to be published. An army of scientists tasked with analyzing data, processing images, and making discoveries was sent home, leaving only essential staff to maintain critical operations. But here's what raises suspicion. The raw video streams from the Perseverance rover continued to come in. The rover did not stop working. The Martian Reconnaissance Orbiter also continued to function. The cameras were active, data was being collected, but it was not published for the general audience. Astronomy enthusiast Dobson's Force, a YouTube blogger with a solar telescope, posted an image on October 3rd with a simple question in the caption, "What the hell is this?" The image showed something dark and angular located in the expected position of the triple object Atlas. For several hours, the post gathered thousands of views. People demanded explanations, pointing out that if an ordinary observer could capture this, what did professional tools see? NASA was silent. No one said a word. The only official confirmation that the observations took place came from Simon Schmooze, an astrophotographer who combined 20 images of Perseverance and discovered a faint spot. He published his work on social media instead of through official channels, like a private individual doing what space agencies had not done. Then a briefing took place at the White House. Stephen Miller, Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy, was discussing the government shutdown when one of the reporters asked a question that had been circulating online for several days. Was the president informed about the triple Atlas object? Silence fell over the room. Miller slowed his speech, carefully choosing his words, and evaded the answer. The briefing continued, but the question was asked on camera in an official setting, and it could no longer be dismissed as internet conspiracy. The United States government was directly questioned about the interstellar object, and they chose not to respond. Meanwhile, Havelo was traveling through news networks, Newsmax, CBS, podcasts, anyone willing to listen. He described the anomalies with mathematical precision. The trajectory was aligned with the plane of the ecliptic, with a probability of 0.2%. Time optimization for planetary collisions was 0.005%. 7 characteristics that made the triple object atlas unique. And he kept returning to one moment. We need data from the Martian orbital spacecraft. High-quality images could reveal the core's diameter, clarify the structure, and answer the main question of what we are observing. But the images were not published. On the podcast with Brian Kitten, Leo mentioned that Congressman Tim Burchett, a member of the House Oversight and Accountability Committee, appeared with him on Newsmax to discuss the object. A sitting congressman on national television speaks about an interstellar visitor and the suspicious silence surrounding it. This is no longer fringe discussion. It has entered the mainstream political discourse. Yet, NASA has said nothing. The European Space Agency announced that Mars Express and the ExoMars Trace Gas Orbiter successfully observed the 3 moons of Mars from October 1 to 7. Tools, including a high-resolution stereo camera, a color and stereo imaging surface system, as well as several spectrometers, collected data. They said this data would be analyzed in the coming weeks, and results would be published when ready. But there were no images, no preliminary conclusions, no excitement about capturing unprecedented views of an interstellar object up close. Only dry confirmation that the observations took place. And then, silence. The Chinese mission, Tianwen. One mission said nothing. The HOPE probe from the United Arab Emirates also remained silent. Every spacecraft on Mars was watching, and every space agency on Earth froze in silence. You don't need to be a conspiracy theorist to find this strange. Just remember what happened with the 2I Borisovs, the previous interstellar comet. When it passed in 2019, images appeared immediately. Scientists were thrilled. Press releases spread. The astronomical community celebrated. Everything happened just as expected. A rare visitor from beyond our solar system, deserving of intense study and public attention. 3II Atlas receives silence. Perhaps the difference is that 2II Borisov behaved exactly like a comet. She had the right chemistry, the right tail, the right gas emission patterns. She was interesting because she came from interstellar space, but she was not anomalous. She did not challenge our understanding. She did not raise uncomfortable questions. 3AI Atlas does all of this. And so, when he disappeared behind the sun on his way to perihelion, entering that one place in the solar system where no telescope on Earth can see him, the silence deepened. Amateur astronomers shared their last images. Scientists published their meticulously crafted, technically precise articles, avoiding speculation. Meanwhile, 15,000 NASA employees waited to be called back to work, wondering what their privileged colleagues had seen in the images from Martian orbiters that were not shown to the public. Impossible things. There is a principle in science called Occam's razor. When you have competing explanations, the simplest one is usually the correct one. One anomaly can be explained. 2 may be a coincidence, but when you add 7 statistical impossibilities, Occam's razor starts cutting the other way. Let me tell you about what makes the Tri-Object Atlas unique among all we have ever observed in our solar system. Let's start with the mass problem. When astronomers first calculated the size of the 3 Atlas based on its brightness, they obtained a number that made no sense. If all this light was merely reflected sunlight, the object would need to have a diameter of 10 to 20 kilometers. In comparison, Oumuamua was only 100 meters. Diva and Borisov were less than a kilometer. This object turned out to be many times larger. Statistical models predicting how many interstellar objects we should discover are very clear. Small objects are encountered frequently. Large objects are incredibly rare. We would have to find hundreds, perhaps thousands of visitors the size of Oumuamua before stumbling upon something equal to 3 Atlas. The probability of this was calculated at about 0.01%, or 1 in 10,000. But then, astrometric data appeared. More than 4,000 measurements from 227 observatories from May to September. When scientists analyzed the object's trajectory and compared it with pure gravitational acceleration, they discovered something astonishing. Almost no deviation. Despite the strong gas emission and the loss of 150 kilograms of material per second, the object barely deviated from its expected path. This indicates a colossal mass, Nuclear, so heavy that even the constant expulsion of gas and dust cannot divert it from its course. Calculations showed that the mass exceeds 33 billion tons, and the diameter is more than 5 kilometers, making it not only larger than previous interstellar visitors, but also about 1 million times more massive than Oumuamua, 1 million times. Think about this rupture. It's like comparing a grain of sand to a boulder. The second aspect concerns sunlight. The Hubble telescope captured the image of Triton and Atlas in the highest resolution on July 21, 2025. Scientists analyzing this image noticed something that had never been recorded in any comet, in the solar system, or in interstellar objects. The scattered light around the object extended about twice as far toward the sun as it did perpendicular or in the opposite direction. Comets have tails that point away from the sun because radiation pressure pushes dust particles outward. This is basic physics, confirmed by thousands of observations over the centuries. However, 3 and Atlas seem to violate this principle. The expansion was not insignificant. The ratio was 10 to 1, meaning it was 10 times longer in the sunny direction than sideways. And this was observed in the peripheral view, indicating that the true elongation was even more extreme when considering the geometry of observation. Heavy Lob and Eric Cato published a paper proposing an explanation related to ice fragments that sublimated at different speeds depending on the side of the object from which they were ejected. Physics was justified, mathematics was confirmed, but this required a very specific set of conditions that had never been observed before in any other comet. A unique configuration just recorded from an interstellar visitor, already showing several other anomalies, namely Anomaly 3, an industrial trace. In late August and early September, a large telescope in Chile aimed its ultraviolet spectrograph at the comet Tri-I Atlas and recorded something that surprised scientists. Atoms of nickel were found in the gas cloud, and their number sharply increased as the object approached the sun, growing approximately 9-fold by a power law. But here lies the problem. Almost no iron was detected. In nature, nickel and iron form together as a result of supernova explosions. They occur in roughly fixed proportions, and each observed comet shows nickel and iron in similar amounts. The 2 previous interstellar comets had normal ratios of nickel and iron, and each comet in the solar system also had normal proportions. However, Tri-I Atlas produced nickel without iron. The only place where we see such a trace is in industrial production. Nickel alloys, materials that have been intentionally purified and separated. The scientists who published this data carefully chose their words, calling it extremely convoluted. They noted that the temperature at the object's distance from the sun was too low to vaporize the refractory minerals containing these metals under normal conditions. They suggested some chemical pathways that could explain this, but there was a sense of uncertainty in their words, usually indicating polarization from another world. When light is scattered on particles, it becomes polarized. The degree and direction of polarization indicate the size, shape, and composition of these particles. Comets have characteristic polarization signatures. We have measured hundreds of such signatures, and these patterns are well known. However, the Tri-I Atlas had a polarization signature that does not exist in any catalog, minus 2.77% at a phase angle of about 7 degrees and an inversion angle of only 17 degrees. This combination has never been measured in any asteroid, comet, or within the solar system, nor in interstellar space. The closest match was not with comets, but with trans-Neptunian objects and a specific center called Pholus. These are bodies from distant corners of the solar system with a completely different composition and history than typical comets. An article presented in the journal Astrophysical Letters concluded that Tri-I Atlas may represent a special type of comet, expanding the diversity of known interstellar bodies. Special type is a scientific term indicating that we have no category for this. Furthermore, the 5th anomaly is elliptical alignment. The solar system is mostly flat. The orbits of planets lie in a plane called the ecliptic, while random objects from interstellar space come from random directions, crossing this plane at arbitrary angles. The probability that the orbit of an interstellar visitor will align within 5 degrees of the ecliptic is about 0.2%, or 1 in 500. The 13th eye of Atlas arrived with a deviation of just 5 degrees. But that's not all. It moves retrograde in the opposite direction to the orbits of the planets. This is the perfect trajectory if you want to cross several planets with minimal course adjustments. Usually, it's 6, but in this case, it's 13. related to planetary timing. The 13th eye of Atlas will pass close to 3 planets during its flight: Venus at a distance of 0.65 astronomical units, Mars at 0.19 astronomical units, and Jupiter at 0.36 astronomical units. The probability of a random interstellar visitor appearing with timing that allows close approaches to 3 different planets is approximately 0.005%, or 1 in 20,000. If you were designing a reconnaissance mission in our solar system, this is the trajectory you would choose. Usually, it involves 7, and here there is a coincidence with the WOW signal. In 1977, the Big Ear radio telescope detected a signal so unusual that astronomer Jerry R. Ammon wrote the word "wow" in the margins. He came from the constellation Sagittarius and lasted 72 seconds, but was never recorded again, despite decades of searching. When the scientists traced the trajectory of the 13th eye of Atlas back through the galaxy, considering its speed and direction, they calculated where it might have been in 1977, and the answer was within 9 degrees of the origin of the WOW signal. The probability of such a coincidence is approximately 0.6%. 7 anomalies, 7 statistical coincidences, and we are asked to believe that it is just coincidence. Chapter 5, October 29th. A confession. Right now, while you listen to this, the 13th eye of Atlas is where we cannot see it, hidden behind the sun, moving towards a point in space where physics becomes merciless. Perihelion is the closest approach to our star. For the 13th eye of Atlas, this moment will come on October the 29th, 2025, at a distance of approximately 1.14 astronomical units, just closer than Mars's orbit, so close that the sun will cease to be a distant source of light and become an overwhelming presence. Imagine standing before an open blast furnace. Now multiply that heat by an unimaginable magnitude. This is what perihelion means for an object coming from the cold darkness of interstellar space. Sunlight striking the surface with gigawatt intensity, not metaphorically but literally, the same watts that power cities. Avilov made an observation that many remembered. Confessions arise under high stress. He spoke about interrogation tactics, but this principle also applies to physics. When you heat ice, it cannot pretend to be anything other than ice. When you heat a stone, it behaves like a stone. But when you heat something that pretends to be a comet, yet could be something entirely different, the mask is shed. There are 2 scenarios of what will happen at perihelion, and they are completely different. Scenario 1. The 13th eye of Atlas is exactly what it seems. A comet, extraordinarily massive, chemically strange, statistically improbable, yet natural. In this scenario, October 29th marks the beginning of impressive activity. Surface temperature will start to rise. Volatile substances that have been dormant for billions of years suddenly come under the influence of solar radiation. Carbon dioxide sublimates, water ice turns into vapor, dust rises in huge clouds. We have seen this before. Comets approaching perihelion become magnificent, developing tails millions of kilometers long. Their brightness increases significantly, and sometimes under stress, they break apart into pieces that eventually disperse. This is violence, chaos, and unconditional beauty. If the object Tri-Eye Atlas is of natural origin, we should see something like this: a massive eruption of gas and dust, brightness increasing tenfold or more. A full comet tail must appear, not an anomalous glow from the sun, but a classic comet tail streaming behind it as radiation pressure does its work. And if this object is as fragile as some scientists suggest, if its 5-kilometer diameter mainly consists of loosely bound ice rather than solid rock, then perihelion could completely tear it apart. We could observe in real time how an interstellar gas disintegrates into fragments, giving us an unprecedented view of the internal structure of a comet from another star system. It would be extraordinary. This would answer questions about the formation of comets, the composition of planetary systems beyond our own, and the processes that eject objects into interstellar space. It would be a scientific spectacle even if the object we study is destroyed. But there is a second scenario. The 3-eye Atlas is not a natural object, but an anomaly, not a coincidence. Nickel without iron, a tail directed backward, perfect positioning relative to the ecliptic, and the origin of the WOW signal. All of this matters. In this scenario, perihelion is not about sublimation, but about activation. Consider what you would do when sending a probe to another star system. It needs to survive the journey. Billions of years in the cold, radiation, impacts, the slow decay of time, wrapping it in ice makes sense. The ice is spread out, protective, making the probe appear natural to any civilization that might notice it before it is ready for detection. But as soon as the probe reaches the inner part of the solar system, approaching the host star, it must wake up. It needs energy, and there is only one available source of energy, the star itself. In this scenario, perihelion is not a test of strength. It is a charging station. Loeb described the possibilities in his works with mathematical precision. The object can utilize the solar escape maneuver. This is a real technique used by our spacecraft. You approach the sun, using its gravity to accelerate and drastically change your trajectory while spending minimal fuel. This is the most efficient way to alter your course in the solar system. The optimal point for this maneuver is perihelion, and the Tri-Eye Atlas reaches it, completely hidden from observation from Earth, hiding behind the sun. If it wanted to change course unnoticed, now is the best time. Or it could release something. Mini probes, small devices that detach and use a retrograde trajectory to intercept planets. Mars, Earth, Jupiter, all accessible from this position with minimal course adjustments. The timing of planetary alignments makes it almost trivially easy compared to arbitrary arrival times. Loeb carefully noted the consequences. If 3 Atlas ships maneuver towards Earth when they appear from the other side of the sun, financial markets could crash. This is no exaggeration. This is a measured assessment of what will happen when humanity realizes it is not alone and that aliens may be unfriendly. But we will not know this until now, because from this moment until the beginning of December, we are blind. Every telescope on Earth, every space observatory cannot see beyond the sun. The 3 Atlas satellites are in complete communication blackout, which is perfect for a spacecraft that does not want to reveal its further actions. The European Space Agency has a plan. From November 2nd to 25th, the moons of Jupiter are being studied by a spacecraft. Currently en route to Jupiter, it will direct its instruments at the 3 moons of Atlas. JUICE will catch the object right after perihelion, when it should be at its peak activity, when everything that must happen has already happened. JUICE was not designed to study comets. His cameras and spectrometers are optimized for studying the IR moon, for detecting subsurface oceans, for analyzing the chemical composition of alien water. But the same instruments can observe the 3 Atlas, and since JUICE is between Earth and the sun, it has a vantage point that we do not have from our planet. If an object develops a massive coma and tail, JUICE will see it. If it breaks apart, JUICE will document the field of debris, and if it does something unexpected, maneuvers or releases objects or shows any behavior inconsistent with a natural comet, JUICE will record that too. The data will not be instantaneous. Space communication takes time, and JUICE is far from home. But by the end of November to early December, we will have answers. At the same time when the 3 Atlas reappear in Earth's sight. December 19th is the date when the object will approach our planet at a minimal distance, still 1 8/10 astronomical units away. Not yet a threat, but close enough for every major observatory to monitor it, close enough for us to track its trajectory with high precision. And it is then that we will know if something has changed. If the orbit matches the predictions of gravitational models, we can breathe a sigh of relief. Another interstellar visitor, strange yet natural, passing by on its way back to the cosmic abyss. But if the numbers turn out to be incorrect, if the trajectory shows even slight deviations that cannot be explained by gas emissions or solar pressure, then all assumptions about our place in the universe require revision. October 29th. On the day when the 33 Atlas IIs reveal their true nature, we will not hear this confession until December. And by then, it may be too late to take any action other than to watch what happens next. Chapter 6. Global Panic. While scientists discussed the data and NASA remained silent, something else was spreading faster than any peer-reviewed scientific research. The internet was ablaze. It all began in the United States, as it often does. TikTok videos showing alleged images of the 33 Atlas, some of which were real and most fakes, garnered millions of views. Reddit threads exploded with thousands of comments. Twitter, now called X, became a battleground between astronomy enthusiasts sharing real observations and influencers seeking engagement with increasingly outrageous claims. But America was just the beginning. In India, the story took a completely different turn. WhatsApp, the main means of communication for hundreds of millions, became a channel for rumors that spread faster than fact-checkers could respond. Messages in Hindi described a spaceship under disguise. Videos with insistent voices claimed that the object was changing course. Screenshots of fake news articles with fear-mongering headlines. One particularly viral retelling claimed that world governments were already negotiating with those aboard the 33 AI Atlas. Another hinted at military forces being secretly mobilized. The third showed an edited image, supposedly from NASA, marked classified, featuring a geometric structure where a comet should be, none of which was real, yet it continued to spread. YouTube channels in Hindi rapidly filled with content. Some sincerely tried to explain what an interstellar object is, while others delved into speculation, combining real astronomical facts with ancient theories about extraterrestrial beings. The boundary between education and entertainment had blurred beyond recognition. In Brazil, something similar was happening on Telegram and Facebook. UFO enthusiast communities, already eager to see patterns in the sky, began to operate at full capacity. Groups that had been analyzing the lights over the Amazon for years now had something concrete to study. A real object from interstellar space demonstrating behavior that even scientists called mysterious. The ecosystem of conspiracies in Brazil is uniquely alive. It combines Indian mythology, Catholic mysticism, and modern folklore about UFOs into something that is hard to easily classify. 33 Eyes Atlas became everything for everyone. A harbinger of the apocalypse, a vessel of enlightened beings come to save humanity from itself. A weapon, a gift, a trial. Facebook groups were filled with new members, live streams discussing the subject lasted for hours, hosts read scientific articles, and then immediately moved to speculations far beyond what those articles claimed. Online comments became digital bonfires around which thousands gathered to share their fears and theories equally. Great Britain, with its long history of crop circles and UFO investigations, approached the Tri-Eye Atlas object with a mix of skepticism and curiosity. British tabloids published headlines that balanced sensationalism and plausible denial. Scientists speculated it might be alien technology, but in most cases, it was Avi Loeb's statements taken out of context. Yet the headlines served their purpose. Russia, as expected, viewed the situation through a geopolitical lens. State media mentioned the object in passing, always emphasizing the uncertainty and confusion from the USA. Some suggested that Western powers were artificially creating a crisis to justify increased military spending. Others grimly hinted that the US government knows more than it says. Possibly even that American secret programs have come into contact with aliens. Russian-speaking forums erupted with technical discussions, and the level of astronomical knowledge among participants was sometimes impressive. But alongside legitimate science, there were speculations that Tri-Eye Atlas was connected to various secret space programs, recovered alien technology, and ancient conspiracies rooted in the Soviet era. Then the incident with Michio Kaku occurred. A screenshot began circulating in which a theoretical physicist appeared to give a television interview, with overlay text claiming he stated that 3-Eye Atlas is heading for a reconnaissance mission with possible hostile intent. The caption read, "This could be an alien probe sent to Earth." The image was real, but the context was not. Fact-checkers traced that the screenshot was taken from an interview on a national channel on February 20th, 2025, several months before Tri and Atlas were even discovered. Kaku was discussing a completely different topic, likely a scenario of an asteroid collision. Someone took his image, added false text, and released it online. It didn't matter that it was a forgery. The post gained over 290,000 views before the platforms began to flag it. By that time, it had been screenshot and forwarded countless times, and each new image became harder to trace back to the source of the forgery. Lord Bebo, the account that published it, never issued a denial. Damage was done. Thousands of people now believe that a respected physicist confirmed that Comet Tri-Eye Atlas is a hostile alien technology. NASA attempted to respond. Their official solar system account published a message on September 30th. Comet Tri-Eye Atlas poses no threat to Earth. It will remain hundreds of millions of kilometers away from our planet. This is a natural interstellar object, extremely rare and scientifically valuable, but not dangerous. The response was immediate and skeptical. If it's just a comet, why the closure? If it's not dangerous, why the silence? If this is a natural object, explain the presence of nickel without iron. NASA did not continue interaction. The statement remained a solitary tweet against a tsunami of speculation. The fact-checking agency Al Jazeera, SANAD, conducted a detailed investigation. They confirmed that the triple object triatlas was indeed discovered by the Atlas telescope on July 1st, 2025. They confirmed that it poses no threat, as its closest approach to Earth is about 270 million kilometers. They refuted Kakus's statements about army mobilization and rumors of secret negotiations. Their fact-checking became a model of quality journalism. It was unlikely to change many minds. While Senad was busy with the fact-checking, Avi Loeb was speaking before the United Nations. Unofficially, not in the General Assembly, but in conversations with delegates, in documents circulated among political advisors, at quiet meetings where the word existential is used without irony, he presented his black swan scenario. The idea that low probability but high impact events require preparation, especially when we consider them unlikely. A black swan is something that seems impossible until it happens, and then appears obvious in retrospect. The concept was developed by Nassim Taleb to explain financial crises, but Loeb applied it to interstellar objects. We assume that all of them are of natural origin, because we have only seen natural objects. But what happens when this assumption breaks down? The hashtag Harbinger began to gain popularity, not in the mainstream information flow, but in specific communities obsessively tracking the triple object triatlas. This term came from ancient texts, from prophecies describing messengers from the heavens, harbingers of change, judgment, transformation. Some took this literally. The theology of the end times fits remarkably well with the description of an interstellar object with impossible characteristics. Others used it metaphorically, a harbinger of a new cosmic era, the awakening of humanity to a more populous universe than we could have imagined. And amidst all the panic, speculation, and wild theories, one voice constantly emerged in the discourse. Stephen Burns, the cosmologist mentioned by Manny Penny, claimed that he considers the triple object tri-atlas to be intelligent, that it exhibits consciousness, and that it is already communicating with us and other planets. No one could find where Burns actually said this. Neither published articles nor interviews, only secondary sources and mysterious messages on social media. But the idea took root because it fit too well with everything happening. Anomalies, silence, a feeling that something is unfolding beyond our ability to see it clearly. Chapter 7. The Verdict of December. In early December 2025, the Triple Object 3 Atlas will emerge from behind the sun, like a swimmer surfacing after a long dive. Astronomers will discover it in the constellation Virgo, low on the eastern horizon in the pre-dawn hours. The brightness of the 12th or 13th class is still too dim for amateur telescopes, but quite accessible for professional observatories, and everyone will be watching the numbers. Orbital mechanics is one of the most precise sciences we have. Newton's laws, refined by Einstein's theory of relativity, allow us to predict where an object will be even years later, with accuracy to the kilometer. We can take into account gravitational disturbances from planets, radiation pressure from sunlight, even the slight push created by comets shedding material. When the trio, Atlas, reappears, its position will tell a whole story. If she is exactly where she should be, according to pure gravitational calculations, taking into account the expected deviation from outgassing, we can confidently conclude that nothing unusual has happened to her during her time behind the sun. She passed perihelion, survived the heat, and continued her destined journey into the distant sunny sector, then into interstellar space. But if her position changes, if the trajectory shows alterations that cannot be explained by known forces, then every study dedicated to this object will require supplementation. Every assumption will be questioned because objects do not change course without reason. Something must push them. The Virara Rubina Observatory will play a key role in what happens next. This telescope, which has recently begun its operation, represents a revolution in how we explore the sky. Previous asteroid studies found about 20,000 new objects a year. Rubina discovered 2,104 asteroids in just the first 10 hours of work. 10 hours. 2,000 asteroids. The consequences are overwhelming. When Rubina focuses on searching for interstellar objects, the stream will turn into a real torrent. Scientists estimate that we may detect dozens of interstellar visitors each year, rather than one every few years and each will be studied considering the lessons learned from the trio of 8 lists. We will know what to pay attention to: chemical signatures, polarization characteristics, alignment of trajectories. If the eightless trio is indeed anomalous, we will have other objects for comparison. If this is the first representative of a new category, Rubina will find its relatives. But December is not only about the mechanics of orbits and future research, it is also the questions that have been piling up since July. What did the Mars orbiters actually see? By December, the government shutdown will be a thing of the past. NASA will return to full staffing. High-quality images from the 3rd of October will be processed, analyzed, and either postponed or prepared for publication. These images, taken when the eightless trio was only 29 million kilometers from the camera, may show details on the core if the coma wasn't too dense. An object 5 kilometers wide at that distance should display structure. Not detailed details, but the general morphology. Is it round, elongated, or irregular in shape? Are there variations in brightness indicating different materials on the surface? Does it resemble other comet nuclei we've photographed, or is it something else? The fact that these images have not been published raises questions that will not vanish simply because the calendar changes to December. Scientific data is usually published as quickly as possible. The competition for the primacy of discovering new facts is becoming increasingly intense. The fact that several space agencies observed 3 eyeless objects on Mars and none published detailed images suggests either a massive silent coordination, which seems unlikely, or that what was seen requires careful analysis before publication. December will be the time to answer for this silence. Either images will appear and confirm that it's just an unusual comet, or the absence of images will become its own answer. Radio astronomers will also be monitoring the situation. The connection with the wonderful signal may be a coincidence, or it may not be. If 3 eyeless objects became a source in 1977, and if they are still capable of transmitting signals, December will provide another opportunity to discover something. Several radio telescopes quietly monitor a region where 3 objects should be located, with constant and patient observation. Any signal, any impulse, any pattern in the radio frequencies matching the object's position will be a revolutionary discovery. The hydrogen line at 1420 MHz is a frequency worth tracking. That's where the delightful signal appeared. It is there that any civilization seeking to be heard will transmit its messages, as hydrogen is the most abundant element in the universe, and its spectral line is a universal constant. If 3 eyeless objects have something to say, it is there they will do so. December 19th is the moment of closest approach to Earth. 1.8 astronomical units, about 270 million kilometers, which is roughly 1.5 times the distance from Earth to the Sun. Not close in terms of safety, but close enough for parallax to become significant. Parallax is the apparent shift in the position of an object when viewed from different points. As the Earth rotates around the Sun, our angle of view on 3 objects changes slightly. By measuring this shift with high precision, we can triangulate the exact distance and speed of the object. Any deviation from expected values will become immediately apparent. Observatories around the world will coordinate observations, with the northern and southern hemispheres providing round-the-clock monitoring. Astronomy enthusiasts will contribute their data alongside professionals. This will be one of the most meticulously documented observations of any object in the solar system in history, and somewhere in this data, we will find either confirmation or contradiction. Confirmation that this is, despite everything, a natural object from interstellar space, possessing rare but explainable characteristics. A messenger from another planetary system, strange because it formed under different conditions than the comets of our solar system, but ultimately obeying the same physical laws. Or a contradiction, something in the trajectory, chemistry, behavior that cannot be reconciled with natural origins. A data point that shatters the model, proof that makes us ponder what we have avoided thinking about. By the end of December, the 3 eyeless will begin to fade again, moving away from the Sun and heading towards the constellation Leo, returning to Jupiter's orbit, which they will cross in March 2026, and then to the outer part of the solar system, the heliopause, and interstellar space. In any case, December will give us answers. Not all, but enough to understand whether we are witnessing the greatest comet show of our generation or the greatest upheaval in human understanding since we realize that the Earth is not the center of the universe. Telescopes are ready, equations prepared, the world watches. Now we wait for the 3 eyeless to emerge from behind the Sun and show us what they are. Chapter 8. Scientific Impossibilities. Let us delve into the science that keeps astronomers awake at night, not in speculation and theory, but in real measurements that make no sense, no matter how the data is recalculated. Let's start with the WOW signal received on August 15, 1977. The Big Ear radio telescope at Ohio State University was conducting a routine SETI study when it detected something that shouldn't be there. A narrowband signal at a frequency of 1420.404 megahertz, precisely where one would expect an artificial transmission. It lasted 72 seconds, which was the time needed for the telescope to capture a stationary source while the Earth rotated. The signal was strong, 30 times louder than the background noise. The printed values of intensity rose from normal units and 2s to 5s, 6s, and reached the maximum, the highest value the system could print before exhausting alphanumeric characters. Astronomer Emmons saw the values rise and wrote one word in the field. Wow. They tried to find it again. Years. Decades. The Big Ear telescope pointed to the same patch of sky hundreds of times. Other observatories joined the search. Nothing. The signal never repeated. Over time, this became the most famous mystery of astronomy. There is no evidence, no confirmations, but it is impossible to forget. Now trace the path of the three eyeless back through space. Considering their speed of 60 kilometers per second, model their trajectory through the galaxy. In 1977, they were about 600 astronomical units from Earth, 600 times the distance from Earth to the Sun, 90 billion kilometers. At such a distance, to produce a signal as powerful as that recorded by the Big Ear, a transmitter with a power of half to 2 gigawatts would be required. This is not a battery. This is not a generator. This is a nuclear reactor with a constant output, focused into a beam narrow enough to traverse 90 billion kilometers and register 30 times above background noise. Can a comet do this? No, with the physics we understand. Comets do not generate gigawatts of energy. They do not emit coherent radio signals. They do not transmit the precise frequency that is a universal sign of technological civilizations searching for one another. But the object, designed to be found, the object that was supposed to announce itself before entering the inner solar system, will transmit the signal just like that. A powerful impulse, strong enough to be unmistakable, followed by silence, as one should not reveal their location until ready. Now let's focus on data from a very large telescope showing nickel without iron. In nature, these two elements have always been connected from the very beginning. When a massive star explodes in a supernova, it creates heavy elements in hellish flames. Nickel-66 decays into iron-66. They are formed in the same nuclear processes, bound in the same minerals, and ejected into space as an inseparable pair. Every meteorite, every asteroid, every comet ever analyzed shows them together. The ratio varies slightly depending on the environment, but they are always present together. Two objects, Iberosovs, coming from interstellar space, like the three eyes of Atlas, show normal ratios of nickel ions. The comets of the solar system demonstrate normal ratios. There is no natural process at the temperatures experienced by Atlas's three eyes capable of separating these elements. However, cleaning can do this. Smelting, chemical processing, and industrial production of nickel alloys require the removal of iron impurities. We do this on Earth every day, obtaining high-purity nickel for electronics, for specialized alloys, for applications where iron may interfere. This process leaves a signature, nickel without iron. Scientists who published this data from the Very Large Telescope explored all possible natural explanations, perhaps unusual chemical pathways in ice, perhaps exotic minerals formed under conditions we have not yet observed, perhaps the physics of dust grains that we do not fully understand. Every hypothesis faced the same barrier. The temperature is too low, the environment is not right, this should not be happening, and it is not static. Nickel production increases exponentially with decreasing distance to the sun by approximately 9 degrees. This means that every time the object approaches by 10%, the nickel output increases dramatically, and this growth is steep. It is not random gas emissions. It is a process that intensifies with increasing solar energy, almost like something being activated. Then there is a tail pointing in the wrong direction, an anti-tail that violates one of the simplest and most reliable rules of planetary science. Solar radiation pressure is not subtle. When photons from the sun strike dust particles, they transfer momentum. It's a small push, but relentless. Over time, it overcomes the weak gravity of the comet and pushes dust particles away from the sun. Every comet that has ever been photographed confirms this. The tail always points in the direction opposite to the sun. Always. Except for the case of Atlas's three eyes, which shows scattered light extending twice as far towards the sun as from it. The Hubble image is clear, and the data enhancement makes it even clearer. There is more matter in the direction of the sun than in the opposite direction. Avi Loeb and Eric Cato presented a model suggesting that this could happen if an object sheds large ice fragments from the sunlit side, and these fragments survive longer due to their size, creating an extended snowline towards the sun. Physics operates on paper. Icy fragments of a specific size are ejected at certain speeds and under specific conditions of solar heating. However, these conditions are extremely narrow. The ejection must predominantly occur from the daytime side. The fragments must be large enough to withstand radiation pressure, yet small enough to effectively scatter visible light. The evaporation rate must be precise so that the fragments survive long enough to create an observable distribution. It is possible, only with difficulty, just as one can toss a coin 50 times and get heads each time. The laws of physics do not prohibit this, but the probability makes one wonder if the coin has been rigged, and this is a pattern. Each anomaly has a natural explanation if you are willing to accept that the three Atlas comets are uniquely configured unlike any other comet. Mass can be explained if it is unusually dense. Trajectory can be explained if a statistical error occurred. Chemistry can be explained if exotic processes occur. Polarization can be explained if the distribution of dust differs from everything previously cataloged. Each explanation seems plausible individually, but they do not exist in isolation. They overlap. 7 anomalies, each requiring its own special explanation, all occurring in one object. At what point does the simplest explanation cease to be natural and begin to seem like a design? This question troubles scientists as 3 Atlas satellites hide behind the sun. On October 1, 2025, an object flew at a distance of 160 kilometers from Earth. At this altitude, astronauts live and work on the International Space Station. Commercial satellites orbit in carefully monitored paths, but this object, asteroid 2025 TF, was not tracked at all. We discovered it only 6 hours after it passed by us at over 13,000 miles per hour, just above the South Pole. Think about it for a moment. A space rock the size of a small car, moving faster than any bullet, zipped through the same airspace where humanity conducts its most advanced operations, and we had no idea it was coming. Meanwhile, on Mars, rovers found what scientists call the clearest sign of ancient life ever discovered. Petals frozen in time that may prove we were never alone. At the congressional hearings, a video was just shown of a military missile striking an unidentified object off the coast of Yemen, which did not explode but continued to fly. The sun enters what physicists call the phase of final efforts, which may illuminate our sky with a roaring light, more intense than we have observed in recent decades. 3 comets are racing towards Earth right now, gaining a green hue as they approach, and one of them may become visible to the naked eye in a few weeks. At the same time, NASA sent 15,000 employees on forced leave, struggling against China for a return to the moon, while a private company prepares to launch the most powerful rocket ever built, possibly in its final testing before a complete overhaul. This is not science fiction. It's October 25, 2025. If you're ready to dive into what is really happening above our heads right now, like and subscribe, as we are about to spend the next 2 hours dissecting the most amazing space news of our generation. Write in the comments where you are listening from, what time it is, and which of these stories shocks you the most. If you want to help our community grow, share this on social media or your favorite messenger. Thank you for always supporting us. Let's start with the asteroid that slipped past our defense systems. Chapter 1. Close Encounter. The asteroid that approached humanity. We spent billions of dollars creating a planetary defense system. Telescopes scattered across the Earth constantly scan the night sky, cataloging every moving object, calculating trajectories, and ensuring that nothing dangerous approaches without warning. This system works wonderfully for large asteroids capable of destroying cities or even civilizations. We track them for months or years in advance. But on October 1st, 2025, our detection system failed to notice something until it passed by us. Asteroid 2025 TF has a diameter ranging from 1 meter 20 centimeters to 2 meters 70 centimeters, which does not quite fit the title of planet killer, but is comparable in size to a compact car. He was moving at a speed of 20 kilometers 19 meters per second, which is almost 13,000 miles an hour, fast enough to cross the United States in less than 4 minutes. Upon closer approach, just after midnight UTC on October 1st, this stone flew at an altitude of 490 kilometers above Antarctica. For comparison, the International Space Station orbits at an altitude of about 420 kilometers. This asteroid rushed through the same area where the astronauts sleep. The Catalina Sky Survey Observatory in Arizona recorded it at 2:35 a.m. Eastern Time on October 1st, using the Bok telescope at Kitt Peak Observatory. But here is what should worry you. This discovery occurred 6 hours and 36 minutes after the closest approach to the asteroid. We did not see its approach. We noticed its departure. Now asteroid 2025 TF ranks second in proximity among all registered asteroids. The record holder remains asteroid 2020 VT4, which passed even closer in November 2020, coming within 370 kilometers of Earth's surface. But we only detected it after it had passed by. There is a certain pattern here, and it does not inspire trust. The problem is not incompetence. The astronomers and engineers working in these detection systems are among the best in the world. The issue lies in physics and resources. Small asteroids such as 2025 TF are extremely difficult to detect. They are dark, fast, and poorly reflect sunlight. Our telescopic networks are tuned to detect large objects, asteroids larger than 150 meters that can cause regional disasters. We track these very carefully, but there are millions of objects in the range of 1 to 10 meters, and they are almost impossible to notice until they are very close. Interestingly, when asteroid 2015 TF was finally detected, scientists had to work backward to calculate its orbit. They established that it moves in an elongated trajectory around the Sun, with a semi-major axis of 1.62 astronomical units. Its orbit brings it to a distance of 0.676 astronomical units from the Sun at perihelion and moves it away to 2.56 astronomical units at aphelion. The orbital period is approximately 2.600 years, and the tilt of the orbit relative to the plane of the ecliptic is about 9.1 degrees. However, all these figures are accompanied by enormous uncertainty. The orbit is considered poorly constrained with a conditional code of 7. This means that the calculations are based only on a one-day observation, so brief that predicting where this asteroid will be in the future is more like guessing than science. Additional observations will be required to clarify its trajectory and assess whether it poses any threat during future encounters with Earth. Consider what it means. The object flew closer to Earth than some of our satellites, and we have only a vague idea of where it came from and where it is heading next. It may return. It may collide with Earth in decades, or it may never come close again. The uncomfortable truth is that asteroids of this size hit Earth much more often than most people realize. The Tunguska event in 1908, which destroyed 830 square miles of Siberian forest, was likely caused by an object measuring only 30 to 50 meters. If the 2025 TF were on a collision course instead of a flyby trajectory, it would explode in the atmosphere with a force of several kilotons of TNT. This would not be enough to destroy civilization, but sufficient to devastate a city if it exploded above it. And we would not have known of its approach until it was too late. Scientists call it awakening. The threat, having passed by, renewed discussions on the need to improve our capabilities to detect smaller objects near Earth. Because if there is anything this meeting made clear, it is that our cosmic neighborhood is much more crowded and dangerous than our current systems can fully control. The question is not whether an asteroid will surprise us again. The question is when it will happen, and whether we will be lucky enough to avoid a collision again. But while we worry about meteors flying past Earth, something much more significant is unfolding on the surface of Mars, which may answer one of humanity's oldest questions. Breakthrough on Mars. Traces of ancient life. For over a year, a particular rock on Mars has been troubling scientists, not because of its size or composition, but because it bears markings. A pattern that would unmistakably indicate life on Earth. On September 10, 2025, NASA made a statement that sparked a wave of discussion within the scientific community and beyond. The discovery of the Perseverance rover regarding potential biosignatures in a sample named Sapphire Canyon underwent the strictest scientific tests, including peer review and publication in the journal Nature. Acting NASA Administrator Sean Duffy noted that this could be the clearest sign of life we have ever found on Mars. Let's return to July 24, 2024, when Perseverance drilled a stone shaped like an arrow, nicknamed Chayava Falls, in the Jezero crater. The rover's tools immediately detected something interesting. The surface of the stone was covered with what scientists began to call leopard spots, small circular shapes with lighter centers surrounded by dark rings. These were not just beautiful patterns, but chemical signatures often formed by microorganisms on Earth that consume organic matter and produce specific minerals as byproducts. The stains contain vinionite and greigite, two minerals that form under low temperature and water-saturated conditions. Vinionite is a hydrated iron phosphate, often found near decaying organic matter and sediments. Greigite is an iron sulfide produced by some forms of microbial life as a byproduct of their metabolic activity. The presence of these minerals together with organic carbon creates what geologists call a compelling potential biosignature. But here the story becomes even more captivating. Chayava Falls is located in a geological formation called Bright Angel along the edges of Neredo Vales, an ancient river valley that once carried water into the crater of Jezero over 3 billion years ago. This valley is about a quarter of a mile wide, indicating a constant, powerful flow of water over a long period. Clay shales and layered sediments in Bright Angel tell of a dynamic environment where swiftly flowing rivers alternated with periods of calm, still water. It is in such an environment that life on Earth, including microbial life, thrives. This discovery was particularly unexpected, as Bright Angel represents some of the youngest sedimentary rocks explored by the Perseverance rover. Earlier hypotheses suggested that signs of ancient life would be limited to older formations, remnants of the earliest and most habitable era of Mars. However, the discovery of these signs in relatively young rocks suggests that conditions for life may have existed on Mars longer than previously thought, or that life could have persisted in the planet's history longer than we assumed. Before getting carried away, it is necessary to discuss what a potential biosignature actually means. It is not evidence of life, but merely a sign that requires further investigation. As mission scientist Kathy Stack Morgan emphasized, astrobiological claims, especially regarding the possible discovery of ancient extraterrestrial life, require exceptional evidence. The review process that led to publication in Nature was intentionally strict. External scientists spent a whole year meticulously analyzing the data and conclusions of the Mars 2020 mission team. They sought alternative explanations, non-biological processes capable of creating similar patterns, and although they found some options, none matched the evidence as well as the biological hypothesis. What makes this discovery so significant? The rover Perseverance used two complex tools to analyze the Chayava waterfall. The device Sherlock, which stands for Scanning Habitable Environments with Raman Luminescence for Organic Substances and Chemicals, detected a bright spectral signal called the G region, indicating the presence of organic carbon. The Pixel instrument, a planetary device for X-ray lithochemistry, mapped the distribution of chemical elements on the rock surface with incredible precision. Overall, these tools showed that organic substances and redox-sensitive minerals were not just present, but were clustered together in small areas, strongly suggesting a connection between them. On Earth, such neighborhood is constantly observed in microbial environments. Bacteria absorb organic compounds and release minerals as waste. These minerals are deposited right where the microorganisms live, creating characteristic patterns. The spots on Chayava resemble the features found in ancient Earth rocks where, as we know, microbial activity occurred. But there is one but, and it is quite significant. To truly confirm whether these traits have a biological origin, scientists need to return a sample from the Sapphire Canyon on Earth, where it can be analyzed with tools far more advanced than those we can send to Mars. The laboratories here are capable of conducting isotope analysis, studying the molecular structure of organic compounds, and performing experiments that are simply impossible with the rover's limited toolkit. This is where the political drama enters the story. The mission to return samples from Mars, a joint effort by NASA and the European Space Agency, was designed to collect the samples that Perseverance meticulously gathered and deliver them to laboratories on Earth. However, the mission faced budget overruns and schedule delays. President Trump proposes in his budget for the year 2026 to completely cancel the current Mars sample return program, resulting in zero funding. During the press conference in September, where the findings in Chayava Falls were announced, Duffy stated that this is not a retreat from the goal, but a strategic shift towards finding a cheaper and faster option. At the same time, China announced plans for its mission to return samples from Mars, which could be launched as early as 2028. If the United States does not return the samples collected by Perseverance, China may become the first to deliver Martian material to Earth and answer the question of whether there was ever life on Mars. The geopolitical consequences will be colossal. At this moment, a sample from the Sapphire Canyon is securely stored inside a sealed tube on the surface of Mars, waiting. It contains possibly the most important scientific discovery in human history, frozen evidence that could change our understanding of life's place in the universe. But while this specimen waits, something else is happening much closer to home, forcing governments to confront questions they would rather not answer. Chapter 3. UFO. The mystery deepens. Congress reveals shocking footage. On September 9, 2025, Congressman Eric Burleson from Missouri attended a committee meeting and showed a video that no one in the public had seen before. A recording dated October 30, 2024, shows a bright spherical object moving against a backdrop of darkness. Then, a Hellfire missile appears in the frame, hitting the object directly on target. What happens next contradicts everything we know about rocket operation. The object does not explode, does not disintegrate, and does not even slow down. The rocket seems to bounce and continues on its path while the sphere keeps flying. This Hellfire missile strikes the UFO and simply bounces off, Burleson commented on the video, and it continued to move. He paused, then asked the question that has echoed in defense circles since. I'm not going to speculate on what it is, but the question is why we are constantly blocked from accessing this information. The video was captured by an MQ-9 Reaper drone operating off the coast of Yemen. At that time, the waters near Yemen were an active combat zone, where U.S. naval ships and aviation protected commercial shipping routes from missiles and drones launched by the Houthis. American forces regularly shot down threats in this region, but this object, whoever it was, did not behave like a drone or a missile, and certainly did not react to the Hellfire strike as known aircraft would. When journalists asked to confirm the authenticity of the video and provide details about the time and place of its filming, the Ministry of Defense declined to comment. A representative of the defense agency stated that they had nothing to provide on this matter. The press secretary of the Ministry of Defense added, "I have nothing for you." The difficulties in disclosing information only deepen the mystery. However, the video from Yemen was not the only revelation at the hearings. Many soldiers testified under oath about their encounters with unidentified anomalous phenomena, the current term for what was once called UFOs. Air Force veteran Dylan Ballin recounted an incident from 2012 when he stepped outside for a smoke during his night shift at Langley Air Force Base in Virginia. A triangular aircraft hovered silently above him for several minutes. Then, according to Ballin, the object swiftly ascended to the altitude of a passenger airliner and left the area at high speed. Ballin reported the incident through official channels and was interviewed by ARO, the Pentagon's Office for Anomaly Resolution, in the year 2023. However, instead of taking his report seriously, he claims that his testimony was rejected. Moreover, he says he faced workplace harassment, manipulation of his access to classified information, and being blacklisted for employment in federal intelligence agencies. His testimony paints a picture of a system that not only does not investigate UFO sightings, but also actively punishes those who dare to speak about it. The hearings concern not only individual observations, but also transparency, or the lack thereof. Representative Anna Paulina Luna, leading the working group, opened the session with a remark that the issue of unidentified anomalous phenomena had long been shrouded in secrecy, stigmatization, and, in some cases, outright disregard. This concerns national security, government accountability, and the American people's right to the truth. This is what makes this moment different from decades of speculation about UFOs. The witnesses are not fringe conspiracy theorists, but military personnel with impeccable records, security clearances, and practical experience. The recordings are not blurry videos from mobile phones in private yards. They are data from modern military platforms obtained during active operations in contested airspace. And the resistance to disclosure comes not from mysterious conspirators, but from official Pentagon offices that must investigate these incidents. RO states that they have no verifiable evidence of extraterrestrial activity or technologies. The agency uses a so-called rigorous scientific methodology and a data-driven approach to better understand UFOs. But critics emphasize that many of the most compelling cases, including the incident in Yemen, are explained by logic that does not always hold. For example, the infamous Go Fast video from 2015, which captured a fast-moving object appearing to fly at high speed over ocean waves off the coast of California. RO analysts ultimately concluded that it was an optical illusion related to a weather balloon, claiming that the apparent high speed was caused by parallax and the angle from which the F-18 fighter jet's camera captured the object. But the pilots who saw these objects with their own eyes, not just on sensors, insist that the explanations do not match their experience. Some analysts suggested that the object over Yemen might be a balloon drifting at high altitudes and reflecting sunlight. The theory is that he appeared to be moving quickly due to parallax when the drone camera tracked him, and the missile possibly just missed, with the angle of the shot creating the illusion of a direct hit. However, former high-ranking intelligence officer Lou Elizondo, who testified at the hearings, sharply rejected this explanation. "We have never seen a Hellfire missile hit a target and bounce off," he said. "When Hellfire delivers a kinetic strike on something solid, usually there is almost nothing left of that something. It's very destructive." So what do we have as a result? Either the U.S. Armed Forces encountered something with technologies significantly superior to our current capabilities, technologies that can withstand direct missile strikes and continue to function, or there is a mundane explanation that officials refuse to disclose publicly for reasons we have yet to unravel. Both options do not inspire much calmness. This is not an isolated case. The National UFO Reporting Center recorded over 2,000 sightings of unidentified aerial phenomena in just the first 6 months of 2025, which is a significant increase compared to previous years. The Pentagon received over 750 new reports from May 2023 to June 2024. Whatever is happening in our sky is occurring more frequently, and more people are taking notice. While governments try to make sense of unexplained objects in the atmosphere, something much more predictable, yet equally traumatic, unfolds above us, driven by the star that enables all life on Earth. Chapter 4. The Sun's Fury, the Last Breath of the Sun. In October 2024, scientists made a statement that should have been the headline news, but somehow got lost in the noise of everyday life. The Sun reached its solar maximum, the peak of its 11-year cycle of activity. For most people, this sounds like dry astronomy, something important for researchers but not affecting everyday life. However, what is happening to our star now is far from academic, and the most intense effects may still be ahead. What no one says about the solar maximum is that the peak of solar activity does not mean the end of dramatic events. It means we are entering a phase that can actually lead to more geomagnetic storms and more impressive northern lights than the maximum itself. Think of it as a firework that shines brightest not at the moment of ignition, but in the final explosive moments before it fades. The sun is ready to give us its last breath, and this breath could illuminate the sky across the globe for the next 2 years. Solar physicist Paul Brackey from the Norwegian Space Agency stated clearly, "Good news for aurora watchers. The peak activity of the aurora is expected a few years after the solar maximum, so we have several more years of high aurora activity ahead. Give this some time to realize. We are not at the finish line. We are approaching a grand finale." To understand why this is so, we need to talk about what actually causes the auroras. During solar maximum, the surface of the sun is covered with sunspots, areas of intense magnetic activity where the star's magnetic field lines are tangled and tense. When these lines of the field break apart and reconnect, they release a tremendous amount of energy in the form of solar flares and coronal mass ejections. A single coronal ejection can expel billions of tons of plasma into space at speeds exceeding 1 million miles per hour. When this plasma collides with Earth's magnetic field, it causes geomagnetic storms that direct charged particles to the poles, where they collide with atoms in our atmosphere and create shimmering curtains of light known as auroras. But here's where the story gets even more interesting. After the solar maximum, the number of explosive flares and coronal mass ejections begins to decrease. You might think this means fewer auroras, but you are mistaken. The fact is that something else happens during the declining phase of the solar cycle. Long-lived coronal holes are beginning to form, dark areas in the sun's atmosphere where magnetic lines open into space, allowing streams of fast solar wind to continuously escape. These high-speed streams can persist for weeks or even months, exerting constant pressure on the Earth's magnetic field, which also causes geomagnetic storms as dramatic as those caused by coronal mass ejections. Solar physicist Sean Scoff explained it this way. During the decline phase, we actually have more geomagnetic storms. The activity of solar eruptions may slow down a bit after the peak of the solar maximum, but as coronal holes continue to form and numerous eruptions occur, we ultimately experience more frequent and sometimes more intense displays of the aurora. We are already seeing this happen. In early October 2025, Earth experienced 5 consecutive days of geomagnetic activity caused by a distant stream of solar wind from a coronal hole. The solar wind speeds reached 68 kilometers per second before gradually decreasing to 608 kilometers per second. Even at these reduced speeds, the wind was strong enough to cause isolated G1 level geomagnetic storms or minor ones. The northern lights danced over the northern latitudes, visible even as far south as New York on certain nights. Photographers in Iceland, Norway, Canada, and the northern states of the USA captured stunning images of green, pink, and purple lights shimmering in the sky. And this was just a warm-up. Just a small coronal mass ejection triggered by an M1.5 solar flare in early October is expected around the 8th, which may lead to a new round of disturbances. Scientists predict that the current solar cycle, the 25th, may maintain high levels of geomagnetic activity until at least 2027 or even longer, due to ongoing flares and persistent coronal holes. However, there is another factor not related to the sun. The orientation of the Earth during the equinoxes, still observed in early October, makes our planet more susceptible to geomagnetic storms. During the equinoxes, the angle of the Earth's magnetic field relative to the solar wind creates conditions that allow more particles to penetrate our atmosphere, resulting in stronger auroral displays. It's like opening a door that is usually only ajar. The practical consequences of all this solar activity go beyond spectacular lights. Geomagnetic storms can disrupt radio communications, interfere with global positioning systems, cause satellite orbital decay, and in extreme cases, even threaten power grids. During the Great Geomagnetic Storm in March 1989, caused by a powerful coronal mass ejection, the entire province of Quebec was without electricity for 9 hours. Transformers overheated, circuit breakers tripped, and millions of people were left in the dark. This storm reached G5 level, corresponding to an extreme level on the geomagnetic storm scale. Current storms are mostly at levels G1 to G3, which are moderate in comparison but still strong enough to cause problems for satellite operators and airline pilots flying polar routes. Scientists use the KP index to measure geomagnetic activity on a scale from 0 to 9. A KP value of 5 or higher indicates stormy conditions. In the first week of October 2025, the KP index fluctuated between 3 and 5, with brief spikes to storm levels. Forecasts indicate that this trend will continue, with frequent fluctuations from calm to active states, sometimes interrupted by stronger storms in the coming months. For most of us who do not operate satellites or control energy grids, the main impact of this solar activity is beauty. Auroras are among the most spectacular natural phenomena on Earth, and the next 2 years may offer some of the best opportunities to observe them in decades. If you live at high latitudes, above 50 degrees north or south, you will have a regular chance to see the lights, but even residents of mid-latitudes, up to 40 degrees, can catch them during strong storms. The last burst of solar activity turned into a light show that will be remembered for a long time. But while the sun paints our sky with fire, other cosmic visitors approach, bringing their unique spectacles. Chapter 5. Comet Chaos. 3 green visitors illuminate the October sky, and something strange happens in October 2025. Look at the sky on the right night from the right place, and you might see not 1, not 2, but 3 comets visible at the same time. All of them are green. All these comets were discovered this year, and one of them may become bright enough to be seen with the naked eye, a rare gift in an era when most comets remain disappointingly dim. The main character of this space show is Comet C 2025 A6, better known as Comet Lemon. It was named after the Mount Lemmon Observatory in Arizona, where it was first spotted on January 3, 2025. At the time of its discovery, its brightness was 21.5 stars, so faint that astronomers initially thought it was an asteroid. However, subsequent observations revealed a condensed comet with a short tail, confirming its true nature. For most of the year, the Lemon Comet remained a barely noticeable object, tracked by professional astronomers but mostly ignored by the general public. Initial forecasts predicted it would reach a brightness of about 9 stars near perihelion in early November, enough for observation through garden telescopes, but still not visible to the naked eye. Then something unexpected happened. In mid-August, after exiting the solar conjunction, when the comet was hidden in sunlight, observers noted it was significantly brighter than expected. By August 19th, its brightness had increased to 11 stars. A short, sharp tail appeared, and the brightness continued to grow. By the end of September, the Lemon Comet reached a brightness of 8 to 9 stars, becoming easily visible with binoculars and small telescopes. Astrophotographers began capturing stunning images showing not only the bright core and surrounding comet, but also a long active ion tail developing away from the sun, with whirls and knots arising from the tail's interaction with the solar wind. On September 30th, a comet with a brightness of 6.6 stars became visible, its ion tail stretching about 3 degrees across the sky, along with a dust tail. Current forecasts, updated almost daily as new observations come in, suggest that Comet Lyman will reach a brightness of 4, possibly even 3 stars, when it approaches Earth on October 21st at a distance of 56 million miles. This will place it on the edge of visibility to the naked eye. From the dark sections of the sky, away from city lights, people will be able to see it as a faint blur. Unlike many comets that peak in brightness too close to the sun for safe viewing, Lemon will be well visible in the evening sky, about 42 degrees from the sun, observed in the west about an hour after sunset. The comet will continue to shine brightly after its closest approach, heading towards perihelion, its nearest point to the sun on November 8th. The best viewing conditions are expected around Halloween and early November, when Lemon passes through the constellation Ophiuchus. For observers in the northern hemisphere, this is a unique opportunity. Comet Lemon is moving on a highly elongated orbit and may not return for 1,350 years, if it returns at all. But Lemon is not alone. The comet C2025R2, named Swan, was discovered just a few weeks ago, literally a day before reaching its closest point to the sun. We didn't notice it earlier because the sunlight concealed it from ground telescopes. However, it was discovered by keen astronomy enthusiasts Vladimir Bezogly and Michael Matayatsu in images taken by the Swan instrument aboard NASA's Solar and Heliospheric Observatory, a space telescope designed to study the sun, hence the name Swan. This comet will not become significantly brighter, as it is currently moving away from the sun, but it will be easier to see when it moves away from sunlight from our perspective. On October 20th, it will approach Earth at a distance of 24 million miles. Impressive photographs of its tails extending beyond the star's disk have already been taken. This weekend, it will pass within 1 degree of Mars, creating a great opportunity for astrophotographers to capture both objects in one frame. The third participant in this cosmic trio is Comet C2025 K18-less, named after an early warning system for ground impact asteroid strikes designed to search for asteroids near Earth, but clever enough to notice comets. K1 is less bright than the other two, but it becomes brighter as it approaches the sun. In the coming weeks, it will be best visible before dawn for patient observers with binoculars or small telescopes. Why are all 3 comets green? This color is caused by diatomaceous carbon, molecules made of 2 carbon atoms that absorb sunlight and emit it at a wavelength visible to the human eye as green. As comets approach the sun, solar radiation breaks down larger organic molecules in their icy cores, releasing diatomic carbon in the coma. The closer they get, the more carbon is released, and the greener they glow. Interestingly, a 4th green comet is currently visible, although it is much harder to spot. This is the interstellar comet Vista 3, Atlas, only the 3rd comet beyond our solar system ever discovered, which recently lost its red hue and became emerald, interacting with solar radiation in ways we are still trying to understand. But this is a story we will return to later. The Lemon Comet has already exceeded all expectations, and among astronomers, there is genuine enthusiasm about how bright it might become. Nick James, the director of the Comet section of the British Astronomical Association, reported that this comet is developing its characteristics very well and is already an impressive object, clearly visible for observation in the morning sky. It's definitely worth getting up for. Unpredictability is what makes comets so attractive. They are not like planets or stars, following predictable paths and maintaining constant brightness. Comets are wild, erratic, sometimes disappointing, sometimes spectacular. They can suddenly shine brightly, fragment without warning, or disappear into obscurity at the moment they were supposed to dazzle the audience with their splendor. Predicting a comet's behavior is like forecasting the weather 6 months ahead. You can make informed assumptions based on physics and past data, but nature is always ready to surprise, and it is such surprises that await us in October 2025. Three green comets race across our sky simultaneously, one of which is visible to the naked eye. The sun actively demonstrates its power. Auroras rage at mid-latitudes. Asteroids slip past our defenses, and a rock with patterns that may be fossilized traces of ancient life has been discovered on Mars. But while this cosmic drama unfolds on its own, a company is preparing to launch the most powerful rocket ever created, a machine that could either revolutionize space travel or become just another note in the long history of ambitious failures. Chapter 6. The Final Act of the Starships. A critical moment for SpaceX. October 13th, 2025. Remember this date. If all goes according to plan, and with SpaceX that is never guaranteed, the world will witness the 11th test flight of Starship, the highest and most powerful rocket ever created. But this is not just another launch. Flight number 11 will be the last for the second version of Starship. Everything that comes after will be bigger, more powerful, and theoretically, more reliable. The question is whether the second version will end its existence on a high note or add another explosion in a year that has already seen too many failures. Let's talk about the main issue. The year 2025 has not been kind to Starship. The year began with a series of explosive failures that undermined trust in the entire program. In flight number 7 in January, the upper stage called Ship encountered catastrophic destruction during its first launch. 4 out of 6 engines shut down prematurely, leading to loss of control and complete telemetry failure. The rocket's destruction was visible from the shores of Florida, Jamaica, and the Turks and Caicos Islands. Flight number 8 in March initially seemed successful. The Super Heavy rocket was caught by the mechanical arms of the launch pad, an amazing achievement, but Ship 34 failed again. During launch, there were 4 engine shutdowns, leading to a loss of control, and the rocket was destroyed 9.5 minutes after takeoff. Then there was flight number 9 in May, which used the first reusable Super Heavy carrier. Another step forward. But again, the upper stage failed to complete its mission. 3 failures in a row, 3 lost rockets, 3 investigations, 3 rounds of redesigns, and promises that next time will be different. Flight number 10 in August finally put an end to the streak of failures. Everything went successfully. The rocket landed as planned, the ship completed its suborbital trajectory, re-entered the atmosphere with a functioning heat shield, and made a controlled landing in the Indian Ocean. He even managed to deploy Starlink satellites during flight, a critically important demonstration of capabilities. For the first time in months, SpaceX and its supporters could breathe a sigh of relief. Now it's time for Flight 11, scheduled for 16:15 Central Time on the 13th of October. It will launch from a spaceport in southern Texas. The mission, by its profile, looks similar to Flight 10, but includes several key differences that make it more ambitious and potentially more risky. The launch vehicle, designated B-15, previously flew on Flight 8 in March. During that mission, she was successfully captured on the platform, making this equipment flight tested. This time, the carrier is equipped with 24 proven Raptor engines, meaning that both the rocket and most of its engines have already undergone launch and landing tests. But here's the twist. Instead of trying to catch B-15 on the platform again, he will execute a unique engine burn configuration during landing that SpaceX plans to use in the next generation of Super Heavy rocket, version 3. The carrier will ignite 13 engines at the start of the landing burn and then switch to a new configuration with 5 working engines in the so-called deviation phase. Previously, only 3 engines were used in this phase. The new approach with 5 engines adds redundancy in case of sudden shutdowns, which has been an issue for several flights. Finally, the carrier will move to the 3 central engines to complete the landing burn, hovering above the Gulf of Mexico before shutting down and falling into the water. SpaceX calls it a stress test. They want to measure the real dynamic characteristics of the device at the moment of engine shutdown and restart during various phases of combustion. If it works, it will confirm the approach for version 3. If it fails, at least it will happen over water, not near the launch site. The upper stage, Ship 38, has its ambitious tasks. It will deploy 8 Starlink simulators, mimicking the size and mass of the next-generation satellites that SpaceX plans to launch for commercial purposes. These simulators will not actually function as satellites. They are on the same suborbital trajectory as the Starship and will burn up upon re-entry, but their deployment tests the mechanisms and procedures needed for real missions. The Ship 38 will also attempt to restart one of its Raptor engines in space, demonstrating the ability to perform maneuvers beyond simple flight. This capability is necessary for future missions to the Moon, Mars, or any other locations requiring precise orbital changes. Then follows the test of the thermal protection shield, and here everything becomes intentionally dangerous. Engineers remove tiles from several areas of the Ship 38 to deliberately test the vulnerable spots in the structure. Some missing tiles are located in areas where there is no backup ablative layer beneath them. If plasma penetrates through these gaps during re-entry, it could burn the structure and cause a catastrophic failure. But SpaceX needs to know exactly where the weak points are and how much load the ship can withstand before a failure occurs. The only way to find this out is to push it to the limit until something breaks. If the ship successfully survives re-entry into the atmosphere, it will perform a dynamic maneuver during continuous descent, testing the control algorithms at subsonic speeds needed for future flights back to the launch site. Then there will be a landing and splashdown in the Indian Ocean, ideally intact and unharmed. All this prepares the ground for the third version, the Starship iteration that SpaceX believes can finally become operational. The third version of the ships will be larger, with increased fuel capacity and greater payload. The launch vehicles will have more engines, allowing for even greater thrust. The most important thing is that the lessons learned from 10 previous test flights and many failures, explosions, and dangerous situations are taken into account. But none of this matters if the 11th flight goes wrong. If the Ship 38 fails during the thermal shield test, critics will point to it as proof that Starship has fundamental flaws. If the new configuration of the launch pad for the rockets fails, it will raise questions about the viability of the entire approach. If something goes wrong in the spectacular form, it could affect SpaceX's relationship with NASA, which is counting on Starship for landing astronauts on the Moon as part of the Artemis 3 mission in 2027. The stakes couldn't be higher. Starship is not just a rocket. It is the central element of SpaceX's vision for the future of space travel. It aims to make access to orbit cheap and routine. It is designed for the colonization of Mars, meant to revolutionize satellite deployment, refuel in orbit, and ultimately transport people beyond Earth on journeys that today exist only in science fiction. But first, it needs to stop exploding. Flight 11 is SpaceX's chance to prove that the second version can finish its story on a successful note, creating momentum for the era of the third version. The launch window opens on October 13th. Millions will watch this event, and in the silence before the ignition, everyone will think of one thing. Please, don't explode. While SpaceX strives to perfect its giant rocket, another country is on a mission billions of miles from Earth, heading towards a target that may hold secrets about the violent past of our moon. Chapter 7. The Lunar Mystery of China. The Bold Mission of Tianwen said. On May 28, 2025, at exactly 31 minutes past midnight local time in China, the Long March 3B rocket soared into the night sky above the Xichang launch site in Sichuan province. Most people in the world hardly noticed it. But what this rocket has sent into space may answer one of the strangest mysteries of our cosmic neighborhood. Is there a piece of the moon orbiting Earth, pretending to be an asteroid? The spacecraft is called Tianwen-2, the second mission in China's planetary exploration program. Tianwen-I went to Mars, delivering an orbiter and a rover that continues to operate to this day. Tianwen-3 will attempt to retrieve samples from Mars, potentially bypassing NASA's problematic Mars sample return program. Tianwen-4 will visit Jupiter and Uranus in a single mission. However, Tianwen-2 has a much closer and more mysterious goal, an object called Kamau Oaleva, also known as the asteroid of the year 2016, X03. Kamau Oaleva is what astronomers call a quasi-satellite, a near-Earth object that appears to orbit our planet. although it actually orbits the Sun. Its orbit is synchronized with Earth's orbit, so from our perspective, it appears to circle around us, never drifting too far or getting distracted. The asteroid is between 40 and 100 meters in diameter, roughly the size of a Ferris wheel. It completes one orbit around the Sun every 365 days, almost exactly coinciding with a year on Earth, performing this strange dance for at least 100 years, possibly much longer. But what makes Kamau Olevu truly unusual is its spectrum, how it reflects sunlight, is very similar to weathered lunar rocks. In 2021, astronomer Ben Sharkey led a study suggesting that this asteroid could be a massive boulder ejected from the moon due to an ancient impact. The name Kamau Olevu comes from a Hawaiian Christian hymn, hinting at a descendant traveling alone, a poetic description of a fragment of the moon, wandering in space while remaining close to its parent. If this theory is correct, Kamau Olevu could tell us about the history of lunar bombardments, the size and energy of impacts that shaped its surface, and even provide pure lunar material samples, uncontaminated by the Earth's environment. But there is another possibility. Kamau Olevu may be an asteroid from the main belt that somehow migrated to a partially captured orbit near Earth through gravitational interactions that we do not fully understand. It would be no less fascinating to explore migration paths across the solar system that current models do not predict. The only way to know for sure is to go there and collect samples, which is exactly what the TN-12 is designed for. On June 6th, just over a week after the launch, the Chinese National Space Administration released the first report on the mission. The spacecraft was functioning normally and had traveled over 3 million kilometers from Earth. The photograph captured one of the sunny arrays of the TN-12, taken by an engineer, floating against the blackness of space. The image was simple, almost mundane, but confirmed that the spacecraft was alive and well. The TN-12 is now beginning its year-long journey to Kamau Olevu. When he arrives there in the year 2026, he will spend another year orbiting a tiny asteroid, studying it up close, mapping its shape and surface, measuring its mass and composition. It will be extremely challenging. Kamau Olevu is the smallest asteroid ever targeted by a space mission, rotating once every 28 minutes, making it the fastest rotating object ever visited by a spacecraft. Landing on something so small and spinning so fast is like trying to grab a carousel with your eyes closed. China plans to use 3 different sampling methods. The first is the hovering method, where the landing craft synchronizes its rotation with the asteroid, collecting material. The second method is the touch-and-go maneuver, similar to what NASA's OSIRIS project successfully used in its 2 missions in Japan. The spacecraft briefly touches the surface, collects a sample, and immediately ascends into the air. The third, most ambitious approach involves using drills on the landing module's legs, allowing the spacecraft to anchor itself to the asteroid's surface for more controlled and prolonged sampling. The goal is to collect at least 100 grams of material, which may not sound like much, but when you're collecting samples from an asteroid 40 million miles from Earth, and your robotic device operates autonomously due to communication delays, every gram becomes precious. As soon as the samples are collected, Tianwen-2 will begin its journey home. In 2028, about 2.5 years after launch, it will approach Earth and release a capsule for re-entry containing asteroid samples. This capsule must withstand an entry speed of 12.1 kilometers per second, faster than anything returning from the moon, creating temperatures and pressures that will put China's thermal shield technology to the ultimate test. But at this point, the mission becomes even more ambitious. After the capsule is released with samples, Tianwen-2 will not complete its work. Instead, he will use Earth's gravity to perform a gravitational maneuver, heading towards a completely different target, Main Belt Comet number 311 Pi Pan stars. The journey will take about 7 years. If all goes well, Tianwen-2 will reach the comet in the mid-2030s, enter orbit, and conduct remote studies of this strange hybrid object that possesses characteristics of both asteroids and comets. The entire mission is planned for 10 years, 1 spacecraft, 2 completely different objectives, returning samples from a near satellite and then approaching a main belt comet. This is bold, complex, and if successful, will showcase capabilities possessed by only a few countries. Moreover, this is a direct challenge to American dominance in space. While NASA faces budget cuts, workforce reductions, and political interference, China is implementing a well-planned, well-funded robotic exploration program that confidently moves toward increasingly ambitious goals. Tianwen-2 launched on schedule. It is functioning well, and in 2028 it may deliver the first samples from an asteroid to laboratories on Earth. If these samples confirm that the asteroid is a fragment of the Moon, China will answer an important scientific question and demonstrate its technical capabilities in deep space operations. If NASA's sample return program from Mars continues to stall while China retrieves stones from both an asteroid and eventually Mars, the symbolic consequences will be impossible to ignore. The space race is not over. It is simply entering a new phase. One day, the finish line keeps moving, and the competitors are running in completely different races. China plays the long game, methodically developing its capabilities, launching missions, gathering data, and showing that patient investments in space research yield results. At this moment, Tianwen-2 is millions of kilometers from Earth and continues to move away, driven by sunlight, and I am aimed at a target that most people have never heard of. But when he reaches his destination, when he collects samples, and they return to Earth, the world will take notice. At that moment, another country will do what only the United States, Japan, and now China can claim, successfully bringing back materials from distant objects beyond the Moon. However, while China confidently advances its space program with clear goals and stable funding, the American Space Agency, wishing to send people to the Moon, faces an existential crisis that threatens to destroy decades of achievements and erase missions that have already been launched. Chapter 8. NASA in crisis, closures, layoffs, and the fight for science. At 12:01 on October 1st, 2025, the federal government of the United States officially shut down. For several hours, 15,000 NASA employees received notices of work suspension and were sent home. Laboratories stood still, offices closed, ongoing research halted. For most agency employees, work completely ceased, but not for everyone. A small part of NASA's workforce, just over 3,000 people, was deemed essential and required to continue working. They will not receive wages during downtime, but will log their working hours and hope for payment of arrears when the government reopens, although they need to come in because their work literally supports the life of spacecraft. Operations to monitor the International Space Station continued without interruption. Ground operators were still monitoring life support systems, preparing and checking commands, and responding to emergencies. Every day, around 1,000 commands are sent from Earth to the ISS to ensure the operation and safety of the crews. If these operators were sent away, the lives of the astronauts would be at risk, so they continue to work and get paid while Congress debates the budget. Another significant exception to the closure is the Artemis program, NASA's efforts to return humans to the Moon. Acting Administrator Sean Duffy clearly outlined the agency's priorities in a social media post before the closure. China does not intend to go to the Moon with good intentions. The implication was obvious. Outpacing China in reaching the lunar surface is considered a crucial national security issue, so significant that thousands of workers and contractors are exempt from downtime. This concerns the employees working on Artemis 2, the test flight around the Moon scheduled for February 2026, and Artemis 3, the actual lunar landing mission planned for mid-2027. This also includes contractors from SpaceX and Blue Origin who are developing lunar landers and other equipment for the program. The contractors were instructed to continue working despite the suspension, recording their hours without immediate payment, as the Artemis program could not afford to fall behind any further. However, the crisis at NASA began long before October 1st. In early 2025, the Management and Budget Office and acting administrators of NASA issued directives to reduce the agency's staff by more than 4,000 employees. From the end of September until January 9, 2026, thousands of long-term NASA employees will leave the agency due to deferred retirement programs. This is not temporary layoffs, but permanent departures, accounting for over 20% of NASA's workforce. And these are not just numbers. The list of those resigning included leading specialists, engineers working on Artemis systems, scientists managing planetary missions, and experts in fields such as energy systems, engine construction, and life support systems. One of the NASA employees at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, wishing to remain anonymous, reported that the agency has lost at least one of its top specialists in energy systems, a critical loss for the development of a nuclear reactor needed for energy generation on the Moon. The refuge from this outcome is created by uncertainty in the budget and political pressure. The budget proposed by President Trump for the fiscal year 26 includes the lowest funding for NASA since 1961, adjusted for inflation. It was in this year that Alan Shepard became the first American in space. The budget proposal includes a devastating 47% cut to NASA's scientific programs. If it is accepted, it will lead to the cancellation of 41 missions, including already launched spacecraft that continue to make discoveries. Let this settle in. 41 missions canceled. These are not missions that are still being planned or developed. These are missions that are already in action. Telescopes observing distant galaxies, probes exploring other planets, satellites monitoring Earth's climate. This statement will literally shut down the spacecraft that have been exploring the solar system for decades, costing billions of taxpayer dollars, and erasing knowledge that will never be recovered. The list of threatened missions looks like the best moments of human space exploration. The Nancy Grace Roman Space Telescope, a flagship observatory intended to discover hundreds of thousands of exoplanets and survey over 1 billion galaxies, will be canceled despite being in the final stages. OSIRIS-APEX, which is currently heading to study the asteroid Apophis during its close flyby past Earth in the year 2029, will be halted mid-flight. The mission to retrieve samples from Mars, despite the samples already being on Mars awaiting return home, will be abandoned, potentially allowing China to surpass America in bringing Martian materials back to Earth. Even missions that have already proven their worth are not safe. The Chandra X-ray Observatory, observing the high-energy universe since 1999 and making discoveries that changed astrophysics, is at risk of cancellation. The Hubble telescope, possibly the most famous scientific instrument ever created, may face cuts or complete cancellation of its mission. The proposed cuts affect not only space research. Missions studying Earth, monitoring climate changes, tracking deforestation, measuring sea level rise, and providing data necessary for weather forecasting and disaster response are also under threat. Planet protection programs aimed at detecting and tracking asteroids that could threaten Earth will also face funding cuts, ironically following the recent unexpected flyby of asteroid 2025, TF. Informants within NASA stated that the introduction of a budget not approved by Congress is illegal and contradicts constitutional principles. One of them noted that the legal department of NASA should know this. They must understand that what this administration is doing violates NASA procedures, its regulations, and does not align with the will of Congress. However, violations continue, often remaining out of public view. The human losses from these cuts extend beyond NASA employees. Universities across the country rely on NASA grants to fund research and pay graduate students. When grant payments stop during closures or budget cuts, entire research projects can collapse. Professors find themselves unable to pay their teams. Students lose funding in the middle of their studies. Decades of accumulated knowledge and institutional experience vanish as people are forced to leave their field. UF astrophysicist Stephen McCandless from Johns Hopkins University, who leads NASA-related sounding rocket projects, stated that failures have impacted the availability of funds. He had to approach the university for emergency funding to cope with the upcoming launch, and he is one of the few working in a large research institution with the means to soften the blow. Smaller programs at less funded universities lack such safety nets. Meanwhile, international partners watch with concern. NASA's collaboration with the European Space Agency on missions like Mars, sample return, and the Artemis program involves mandatory agreements and shared expenses. When NASA unilaterally changes plans or cancels missions, it jeopardizes relationships built over decades and undermines America's reputation as a reliable partner. Perhaps the most destructive is the loss of public trust and scientific momentum. Space exploration is a long history. Missions require years or even decades for planning, creation, launch, and execution. It is impossible to simply pause an interplanetary station in flight and restart it later. You cannot delay the mission to Jupiter for a year and expect planetary alignment to wait. The laws of orbital mechanics do not care about budget cycles or political priorities. When continuity is broken, when programs are canceled and restarted, when talented people leave and are not replaced, damage accumulates. Each canceled mission is a missed discovery. Each lost expert is decades of experience that vanish. Every closure is a moment that must be painfully rebuilt from scratch. Yet, hope has not faded. The space community begins its fight. Protests are held at NASA's headquarters in Washington, where employees and supporters demand full funding and an end to cuts. Lawmakers from both parties, especially those representing districts with major NASA facilities, oppose the administration's proposals. The House of Representatives and Senate have introduced budget bills that exceed the president's request. However, by early October, a final decision has not yet been made. The question is whether this resistance will be enough, and whether Congress can uphold its constitutional powers regarding federal spending and reject budget cuts that could undermine American leadership in space. Will citizens demand that their representatives protect the agency that gifted us the moon landing, Mars rovers, Hubble, and James Webb telescopes, and decades of discoveries that expand human knowledge and inspire generations? Because NASA is at a crossroads. One path leads to continued research, scientific discoveries, and American leadership in space. The other path leads to managed decline, canceled missions, loss of expertise, and watching from the sidelines as other countries advance rapidly. The choice is not made by scientists or engineers. It is made by politicians and bureaucrats, many of whom will never see the consequences of their decisions, while those who have dedicated their lives to exploring the universe watch their work crumble to pieces. It is October 25th, 2025. Asteroids pass by unnoticed. Potential signs of life have ceased on Mars. UFOs appear in military footage without adequate explanation. The sun flares in its last active phase. Comets race towards us from the darkness. China is undertaking ambitious missions with a clear goal and stable funding. A private company is building the most powerful rocket launcher in history, while a government agency, aiming to send people to another planet, struggles for survival. The universe does not care about our budget disputes or political disagreements. It continues its ancient dance, indifferent to whether we choose to observe, study, explore, or simply turn away and pretend that the cosmos does not matter. But it does matter. Every discovery, every answer to questions, every riddle solved adds to the total sum of human understanding and reminds us that we are part of something much greater than ourselves. And now, we are at risk of forgetting this truth at the very moment we need it most.